On this week's Coffee with GPA, we've actually got something a little bit special. Not only do we have two incredible coffees to look at, but we have our first recipe as well. So, how do you fuse charity work, amazing coffee, and biscuits all into one complete video? You watch coffeewithgpa.com. This time at least, anyway. So welcome back to coffeewithgpa.com. If you are brand new to this channel and you like learning more about some of the different arrays of coffee available to you on the market today, please consider subscribing to this channel to continue your journey with us. And if the video has been super useful, please also give it a thumbs up. Frontline Coffee. Now, I first saw these guys on Instagram actually, and the thing that drew me to them was the amazing charity work that they do. Now, all of the coffee that they produce actually goes towards benefiting certain charities within the emergency services. Fire and rescue, the lifeboats, policing, ambulances and the NHS. They literally do everything. Now, these particular coffees are great for two reasons really. Three reasons actually. First of all, they taste amazing, and I think that's really important when you're looking to buy a new coffee. Second, the amazing charity work that becomes a big part and fusion of Frontline Coffee. And third of all, the fact that actually it's really not that expensive. A 250 gram bag of any of the coffees that we look at today are only £6.50. Now, when you think about the amount of work that goes into helping some of those emergency services, certainly if you live in the UK, you'll really understand this. And perhaps you have your own story that will kind of translate so you understand exactly why supporting the emergency services is so critical and so important in this day and age. So let's have a little look at our coffees. First of all, we have the 1948 Devon blend. Now, this one is a house blend coffee, and it's actually an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe as well, which is quite impressive. You get a lot of quality coffee in that for that £6.50. And second of all, and the one that we're going to test today, is Signature Roast. Now, this one is a Santos mix, and actually roasted, both of these roasted really medium, which is great. I know a lot of people enjoy a dark roast. I'm very much a kind of favour, I tend to favour the light to medium roast coffees. So let's just have a little look at this, see what it looks like, see what it smells like as well. And I always like the brown paper bags that come along with it. It just feels so authentic for roasted coffee. Amazing. So the beans themselves, these are a fairly sort of smallish, medium-sized bean as part of that blend of beans. Lovely golden medium roast. But the smell that comes off of that, it has quite a lot of sugar browning first of all. The sugar browning is the smell that you get in that very, very first smell. Super sweet, but there's also a slight hint of citrus in there as well. But that's a really fragrant coffee. It's lovely to open that bag first of all and just get that big whiff of all of that beautifully roasted coffee. It smells absolutely fantastic. However, it's one thing actually tasting a coffee by itself, but there is something else that we need to do in order to get the best from this. Now, in particular, I like to have something to go along with my coffee. So today, in a bit of an homage to lots of trips to Italy in recent years, I'd love to show you how to make an Italian biscotti that pairs perfectly with this wonderfully sweet, rich and indulgent espresso. Okay, so here's my recipe for the perfect Italian biscotti to go with our espresso. We want to start with some flour. I'm just using a standard strong white flour. However, you can choose to use different types of flour if you prefer. Sugar, salt. We have some baking powder, free-range eggs, some Madagascan vanilla extract, and we have some pistachios. So we want to start by getting 3 cups of our flour. Now I'm using cups, but you don't feel like you have to use cups. If you want to use scales and weigh it out very specifically, you can do that. I just think cups are an easy way of making it a bit more kind of functional while you're in the kitchen and while you're in your own home. Next up, we're going to use 1 cup of caster sugar. So this is going to be a really sweet recipe, but it's super, super tasty. Okay, now for the eggs. So into the mix of the flour and the sugar, we're going to use 3 eggs and 1 egg yolk. But there's a little tip. Having tried this a few times, I think the easiest way of doing this is actually putting it into a mixing jug. Now conveniently we have our we have our coffee jug, because why not? But we're going to crack 3 eggs into this, and then we're going to add 1 extra egg yolk as well. Perfect. Now with this particular recipe, what I want to do is actually mix the eggs together first, rather than just try and chance it and put the eggs on the inside of the mix and then try and sort of battle with getting it all together. So we're going to give our eggs a light beat now. That should do the trick. A little tip for this part of it as well, rather than just pouring it on top of your flour and sugar mix, it's actually quite handy if you create a small well just on the inside, and then you can add your eggs to that. Okay, now 2 finishing touches before we start to make our batter. First of all, we're going to add 1 teaspoon or just over 1 capful of our vanilla extract. Now I'm using a salt grinder as well. Don't feel like you have to use a salt grinder. Don't even feel like you have to use the pink salt. If you want to use table salt or rock salt, as long as it's going to be a nice fine grinder that will mix into your batter, it'll be absolutely perfect. Next up, we're actually going to mix all of this together. And what you start to see eventually is a really nice light yellow cream coloured dough. And you want to aim for the consistency perhaps of slightly thicker than a cake mix, slightly less heavy as a bread mix. I'm just going to keep mixing those 2 together. You can see now that it all starts to fuse together as one thing. The next stage then is to get your hands dirty and really get in there and start to knead this dough together. Now, just as a little tip, admittedly, I'm not making this according to weight, I'm making this according to feel. And there's a million reasons why this is right and wrong, but what I've found is that if my mixture is slightly too wet, I do just add a little bit extra flour. That will then eventually start to really kind of take all of that excess moisture out, and it will make the dough feel really, really good. One thing that's worth bearing in mind is that you can't really estimate the amount of time that it's going to take to bring the dough together and start kneading it. This is all based on how hard you knead the dough, how quickly you mix it together. It literally has loads and loads of different reasons as to why it could take lots of different times. So don't panic if you think, oh, it should be around 10 minutes and it doesn't become 10 minutes, it becomes longer. Just enjoy the process. It's actually really, really good fun, and it's super therapeutic as well. One of the beauties of Biscotti and one of the beauties of travel is that anywhere you go in Italy, particularly I think some of the most memorable places for me have been places like Portofino and also Florence. Amazing, producing incredible biscotti or amaretti biscuits, and you can use that with your espresso just to give you a perfect boost of sweetness with a great rich dark espresso, very similar to what we've got here today. Perfect. And there is our dough. Now, with this particular dough, it's got a nice colour to it. It feels soft and it feels moist, but it also feels dry enough so you can now start to shape it a little bit and it won't stick to your fingers necessarily. But there's one more stage. Now, we don't just necessarily want to leave it as a dough mix. We want to now start getting our pistachio nuts in there. So we're going to start de-shelling our pistachios. The great thing about pistachios is that although they're small, the taste really packs a punch when it's mixed with this dough. Now, word of warning, if you're anything like me, you probably make a bit of a mess when you're actually cooking. So remember to clear up as you go along. It will save a lot of hassle a bit further down the line. Also, something great to do besides, just your usual, if you do tend to eat biscuits with coffee, a biscotti is a beautiful way of trying something that gives you a good balance of sweetness with your good strong espresso, as we mentioned. Feel free to also go to your local supermarket, your local grocery store, and just get pre-shelled ones. You do actually pay a little bit more for it, but if you haven't really got the time to be sat there for 3 hours, not really, a good period of time de-shelling them, then actually it's a great way of saving a bit of time. Perfect, so stage 2. Now I have only used about 100 grams of pistachios. Now I'm going to use these in my dough mix. So I'm just going to pour those into the dough, and I'm then going to re-knead it so that all of the pistachios are inside that dough. You want to make sure you get all of those pistachio nuts inside deep into that dough. And there we have our awesome biscotti dough. So the next stage is to get our dough and to cut it into 2. Now you can just use a knife for this. I'm going to place that onto a piece of baking paper or grease-proof paper. I'm just going to cut that into 2 pieces. Now the idea of this is to allow for 2 sort of rolls to cook. How good does that look already? Literally cut right down the middle, and the pistachio nuts and the dough are really starting to sing. So I'm now going to place this into a baking tin, and I'm going to roll both of these out so they're in 2 sort of large-ish sort of sausage shapes that are going to be around 10 to 12 centimeters long and around 2.5 inches thick. Perfect. So there's our 2 dough rolls that have been laid out onto our baking tray with that greaseproof paper. Now we're going to put these in the oven at 180 degrees centigrade for about 20 minutes. So 20 minutes is up. It's now time to get them fresh out of the oven and look at stage 2. Great, so for stage 2, what we actually want to do now is cut the rolls into individual slices. So this is what's going to really make the biscotti look the traditional biscotti look. And we're going to cut them into fairly small slices, say about just under 1 centimetre each. And we're then going to lay them back down on top of our greaseproof paper again and bake for a further 10 minutes. So there we have our espresso and our biscotti as well. Let's just give the coffee a taste first and foremost. And that has got some richness to it. Now if we're thinking on that Italian theme, the beauty of this is that it reminds me exactly of the espressos that I drank regularly whilst in Florence last year. It's just so rich on that surface. That is a really good espresso. Now it has a slight tartness to it, but it's super smooth at the same time. There's no bitter taste into that, which is really important, and I find it so easy to get espresso really wrong, and it's certainly something for me that I've had to learn a lot about. But the flavours on that are great. You have an almost very subtle cranberry tartness to it, but that's more of a feeling than anything else. But the actual taste of it is full of chocolate, full of caramel, full of dark sugars as well. It just reminds me of some of those ingredients that we used inside our baking today. Paired that with our biscotti. It's just really good. You've got the lovely sweet and nutty flavours of the biscotti. And actually a subtle nuttiness gets brought out in this as well, so the two of them complement each other absolutely brilliantly. And whether you choose to dunk your biscotti or not, it's never a bad thing, but it's flipping delicious. So I hope these coffees treat you well. Frontlinecoffee.co.uk. If you are brand new to this, give these guys a try. Just remember that the money that you're spending on that coffee not only gives you a delicious cup of coffee, but it also goes towards helping a huge amount of the emergency services. So money well spent on every step of the board. I really hope that this video has been useful to you and you enjoy your coffee and your baking. And I can't wait to see you again very, very soon on coffeewithgpa.com. Take care.